So today we're going to do something a little different, if you hadn't figured that out already. Instead of a typical sermon, Kathy and I are going to have a conversation with each other, but in front of all of you, about a topic that we don't talk much about in UU churches: sin. And because we decided that wasn't risky enough, we thought we'd throw in some talk about racism as well. So buckle up. Kathy, what is sin?
Well, let's start with the easiest concepts first. First, I have to acknowledge what a very loaded word sin is to many folks who come to Unitarian Universalism from other faiths. It's a concept that has been used by those in power to suppress and shame those in their spiritual care. When folks talk about being in recovery from their early religious experiences, sin is usually a big part of what they're rejecting. Many UUs will shake with rage and walk away when the word is even mentioned. But this is our month of courage, so we're going to look at it today. I don't think we should reject the concept of sin without examining it first in a Unitarian Universalist frame. The dictionary definition of sin is an offense against God, religion, or good morals. In my UU frame, that looks more like an offense against what I hold to be most important, what I lift up, and what I feel is sacred. And because I strongly believe that I have no control over anyone's actions but my own, my definition of sin becomes my own actions against what I hold most important, what I lift up, and what I feel is sacred.
I actually have a similar definition that I use for sin. The Hebrew and Greek words for sin that were used in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, the original, literally meant missing the mark. It was the same word that was used to describe shooting an arrow at a target and not hitting the bullseye. So when I think about sin, I think about it as the times when we miss the mark, when we're not quite on target in our relationships with each other. Now, often sin is portrayed as this big, bad thing. And as you said, Kathy, there's a lot of shame in it. But I don't think it has to be that way. We all miss the mark sometimes. That's part of being human. But it doesn't automatically make us bad people. And I think that's important to remember. So Kathy, you talk about not being able to control other people's actions. For you, is sin all about your own actions, or is there a place in your definition for the actions of society?
I think if a society holds up stories about itself as its truth, but it doesn't live up to or live into those truths, that might be a societal sin. For example, in the United States, we hold up the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Yet our societal actions miss the mark on that one over and over again. But in order to judge societal sins, I think we have to put ourselves into the societal picture. We can't just brush them off as societal issues and blame others without taking responsibility for the roles we play in our society. We have to have the courage to claim our own power in this society, however that looks.
Yeah, kind of like what Peter just read for us.
That's right.
I'd agree with that. We definitely need to claim our role in the problems of society. But I also think it's really valuable to keep in mind that we're part of systems that are bigger than we are. We're not just standing here alone. So something like white supremacy or systemic racism is certainly my problem, but it's also our problem. There's a piece of the work that is about changing myself, and there's a piece of the work that's about working with others to change the larger system.
I think part of our responsibility around sins and the sins of white supremacy and racism is looking at them multidimensionally. That is not just looking at how Black people are mistreated by these systems, but also how we benefit and white people benefit and how I benefit from these systems. In all sinful systems, we need to ask ourselves, who is benefiting? Maybe the benefit for us is that it's just easier not to say anything. Maybe reaping the benefit of systems, maybe we are still reaping the benefit of systems set up in our parents' and grandparents' generations, and I know I am benefiting from those systems. But in both kinds of sin, I think our real goal, or my real goal, should be to listen more and to be more compassionate. If I can put myself in your shoes, if I can really acknowledge the strand that connects me to you, then we can move justice forward. We can move our relationships and our covenantal relationships forward. I have a very smart friend who says, there is nothing but relationship.
Yeah, there is nothing but relationship. How true that is. So it sounds like we've got two kinds of sins that we're talking about here, and that are deeply interrelated. So on the one hand, there's the systems in our world that benefit some folks at the expense of others. That's the one kind. And on the other hand, there are the personal interactions and biases we each hold, right? So we've been up here with theory. Let's get down to the personal. I wonder, Kathy, do you have any personal experiences of either of those kinds of sins?
Of course I have. And I think it's easier for a person like me to see the systemic ones, sort of the looking out ones. I've read Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack and Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for White Reparations, and I know that I have benefited from these systems my whole life. My grandparents were able to buy a home in the 1940s, which appreciated in value. When they died, I got to inherit some of that value, and I was able to buy my own home. When I feel threatened, I can call the police. And I know, and I feel confident that the police will come to my home, believe me, and help me. When I express strong opinions, I'm not accused of playing the race card. The list goes on and on. There are plenty of systemic things that I know that I'm not even seeing. The harder ones for me to see are the personal ones. Places where my own actions fall short of what I hold most important and what I lift up as sacred. What do these look like? I know I lock my doors in the car when I see young people in hooded sweatshirts walking down the street in French Hill and I'm driving alone. When a black person is telling a story about when she experienced racism, I look for ways immediately to explain to her, no, I think you just misunderstood that situation. It wasn't really racist. I want to believe that I have read enough and learned enough to be beyond these issues myself. When someone is hurting, I really, really want to interrupt them and say, oh, but not me. Not me, no. Can't you see I'm a good white person? Won't you please just exonerate me?
Yeah. I can absolutely relate to that. There's this desire in me to say, not me, not me. And yet I know that there's white supremacy that lives in me in ways that I'm learning more and more about every day. And I'm sure we'll continue to learn more and more about. Before coming to Nashville, I lived in Brooklyn, New York, in a neighborhood that had experienced a lot of gentrification in the previous 5 years. And my walk home from the train took me through a neighborhood that was right on the edge of what I call the disputed border of Crown Heights and Prospect Heights. And I say disputed because the area was so rapidly changing that the actual classification was not entirely clear. Prospect Heights was this trendy neighborhood full of bars and cafes and little local boutiques and lots of white upper middle class professionals. Crown Heights, on the other hand, was this neighborhood full of storefront churches and 24-hour delis and liquor stores with bulletproof glass and lots of working class African American and Latino families. My regular walk home was an incredible amalgamation of these worlds, with a hip coffee shop and baby boutique lying directly across the street from the Straightway Church of God in Christ, Inc. And 5 years earlier, muggings were a common occurrence on that street, and rent was dirt cheap. When I lived there, I didn't feel any fear walking that walk home from the train. And the rent had quadrupled in some places. forcing out families that had lived in the neighborhood for years. So this gentrification was all around. And I loved living in that neighborhood. But I really struggled in the ways that by living there, I was complicit in the gentrification that some would say was ruining the neighborhood, and that I know was forcing families out. I didn't go to the Straightaway Church of God, and I really loved going to those little cafes that were new to the neighborhood. I was a part of this in a way that was very real every day. It was an experience in which I was part of a systemic sin that was happening and absolutely had a personal role in it as well. And so one night as I was walking home from the train, an older African-American man was standing on the median as I was crossing the street, and he greeted me a little bit too exuberantly. I was tired and ready to be home, and I assumed he wanted money, which was the case with most exuberant greeters in New York. So I mostly ignored him and walked on, and he was mad. He started yelling after me, "You people move into our neighborhood and you don't even have the courtesy to say hello." It was so hard to hear that because it was true, right? Like you said, Kathy, I wanted to turn around and say, "Oh, no, I'm a good white person. I live here because it's the only place that 2 grad students can afford to live in New York." And that was true. But what was also true was that I wasn't even trying to build relationships with the people of color in my neighborhood. Though I was part of this bigger sin, I also had personal biases, some of which I walked down the street every day not being aware of. So what do we do with this? When we recognize our complicity, our personal sin, how do we have the courage to face it and do better?
I think it's vital in this work to try to separate what we've done from what we are. By that, I mean, yes, you and I have done some pretty crappy things in regard to race and privilege. And by our own UU definition, my own UU definition, those are probably likely sins. I think the liberating difference in Unitarian Universalism is that from other faith traditions, is that my sinful actions don't make me an irredeemably broken sinner. If we agree that there's nothing but relationship, then in these situations there is no outside power that's going to judge me, nor is there anyone outside of relationship that needs to forgive me. Within the relationship, yes, we really need to learn how to say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, my actions were wrong. Please forgive me. I'd like to make this relationship whole." But there is no need for, "I can't believe I've lived with this for so long. I'm such a bad person. I feel so guilty." Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better."
I love that Maya Angelou quote.
Me too.
And I think you're absolutely right. Our work is not about guilt. In fact, I think guilt gets in the way. It's
Yes.
not productive at all.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons sin is such a hard word to use when we talk about race. Because people who come from other religious traditions often hear the word sin and go automatically to guilt.
And shame.
And shame, yeah. That's the automatic response that's built in. Rather than to thinking about how they can do better next time, which I think is the Unitarian Universalist answer, right? Is when we notice that we've missed the mark, rather than saying, "I'm a bad person," we say, "Okay, how can I do better next time? How can I begin again in love?" It takes so much courage to say that, though. It takes so much courage to say, "I screwed up, I learned something, and I'll try to do better next time around." But that's what our Unitarian Universalist faith calls us to do. We're called to have the courage to say, "I am part of the problem, and I am going to do my best to be a part of fixing it too." It's not easy work, but I have the faith and I hope you do too, Kathy,
I do.
that together we have the courage and strength to do it. May it be so.
Truly. Amen.
I'm gonna make a change for once in my life. It's gonna feel real good, gonna make a difference, gonna make it right. As I turn up the collar on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street, but not enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their needs? A summer's disregard, a broken bottle top, and a one-man soul. They follow each other on the wind, you know, 'cause they've got nowhere to go. That's why I want you to know I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Na 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 na. I've been a victim of a selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize. Could it be pretending that they're not alone? While we're both deeply scarred, somebody's broken heart and a washed out dream. They follow the pattern of the wind, you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. With the man in the mirror, oh yeah. I'm asking him to change his ways, and change. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. You gotta get it right while you got the time. When you close your heart and you close your mind, that man, oh yeah, that man, that changes, that man, better change, that man, If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. Na 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 na. Oh yeah. Na 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 na. I'm gonna make a change. It's gonna feel real good. Come on. Change. Just lift yourself, you know. You got to stop it yourself. Yeah. Make that change. Make that change today. Man in the mirror. You got to not let yourself, brother. Yeah. You got to make that change. Make that change. That change. Man in the mirror. You'll love it. You'll love it. You'll love it. You'll love it.